Hi everyone. Settle in, dim the room. Let the weight of your blankets feel like a quiet promise, and turn the volume just low enough that the night does most of the work. Tonight's unease lives in places that are supposed to be empty. Mail stacked in a silent slot, porches that creak only for the wind, rooms waiting for footsteps that never arrive. These accounts come from people certain the house was vacant, utilities barely whispering, the space left to its own breathing until keys turned where they shouldn't, and quiet began to feel like it was watching back. Stay to the end. A soft thread runs through all 8 tales, easy to miss unless you're listening closely. Notice how a number returns, how a light looks one glow fuller in the glass, how a voice shapes 2 gentle syllables without a mouth to make them. No harshness here, no jump scares, just the slow lift of a latch, the familiar hush behaving differently, and 8 empty houses that did not wish to be alone. If you like, breathe in for 6 and out for 8, and let the room settle around you. Keep your eyes heavy, your mind curious, and your heartbeat steady. The night is ready, the doors remember how to open, and the houses have been practicing their welcomes. Take one more breath, and begin. Story number 1. There was a real estate photographer who swore she preferred empty houses. Her name was Mara, and she liked the way light behaved without people. How sun on bare hardwood created its own furniture out of shadow. Late one autumn evening, she unlocked a Victorian that had been in probate for months. The key had come in an envelope with a note. Alarm off, lights on a timer. Please photograph before sunset if possible. She'd missed the sun by 20 minutes, and dusk settled across the street like a blanket being shaken out. The porch gave a little under her shoes, not enough to worry her old wood had its music. The lock turned with a long throat-clearing sound, and the door eased in. The air smelled like the inside of a cedar chest and a remembered cologne. Nothing sharp, just a careful, faded presence. She turned the switch. The chandelier woke in a series of hesitant blinks, a century-old attempt at modern brightness. The house had been emptied for months, but the carpet remembered the weight of a sofa she would never see. The living room walls wore faint rectangles where frames had once hung. The paint beneath was fresh and soft. The rest had gone gently tea, stained with time. She placed the tripod in the center of the hall, let the camera lean into the level bubble, and composed. Her work had a rhythm. Foyer, living, dining, kitchen, up the stairs, primary, hall bath, 2 small bedrooms, attic if it was photogenic, basement if the listing needed it. She clicked the first exposure and listened to the familiar curtain and mirror murmurs from the camera's body. When she took the shot of the staircase, her lens caught a thread of dust lifting in the air like a thin curtain, the way dust sometimes answers a small static in a room. On the second floor, the hallway ran straight, with doors on both sides, 6 in all. The far door, she noticed it, without meaning to, had a wedge of darkness beneath it, darker than the others. She checked the house like she always did, talking softly to herself out of habit, as though a contractor were there to hear it. Bathroom, 1 sink, clawfoot tub, she noted, her camera recording in silence. Primary, north-facing windows, closet with built-ins, good. She liked the click of her own voice in an empty place, the way it reminded her she was not a ghost with a camera, not someone who could be mistaken for the house's imagination. Halfway through the roll of rooms, the thermostat clicked. It was an ordinary sound, the kind that meant a furnace recognized a number and made a promise to keep it. She touched the dial without thinking, and realized the needle already sat at a neat, careful temperature. 68. She didn't remember adjusting it. She left it as it was and moved on, telling herself it might have been the agent on a previous visit, or a timer she had never understood. Her fingers still held the sense memory of turning it in a way they had not. In the smallest bedroom, the walls had been patched where shelves had hung. A single closet held a collection of wire hangers, all pointing left but one, a small, trivial note that stuck to her like a sticker. She framed the closet door in the shot for texture, a suggestion of life in an otherwise spare space, and clicked. As she lowered the camera, something in the hallway changed the temperature, perhaps. It felt as though someone had opened a door somewhere else in the house, equalizing long still air. She looked back and saw nothing, only a hall that had been empty for months. Downstairs again for a wide shot of the kitchen, she discovered the back door locked, but the chain had been slid into the catch from the inside. She had not noticed the chain when she came in. People left chains on old doors, she told herself, and her hands had been full with tripod and case. That became the explanation, and she liked it enough to keep it. She set up in the dining room, aiming toward the archway. Her camera's timer light blinked, then blinked again, as if set to a delayed shot. She hadn't set it. She told herself she must have brushed the button. She reached to switch it back and paused, because the camera clicked again on its own and captured the empty arch with the measured patience of a machine doing its job. She checked the screen. The image looked fine, no motion blur, no oddness, just an emptiness that felt full, like the way a stage looks after the audience has left. In the mirror, leaned in the corner of the living room, an old piece with a bit of silvering gone from one edge. She tested an angle. The mirror, angled toward the hall, caught her tripod and the soft glow of the chandelier. But in the mirror's version of the room, the chandelier held one extra bulb. She adjusted the mirror's position, convinced the warped glass had invented a light. The bulb count corrected itself. She took a picture and a breath, both shallow. The doorbell chimed then. Not a visitor's knock in earnest. Not the doorbell's bold cousin, but a single delicate note, as if the button had been tapped with a fingertip, that belonged to a thought. She went to the door less out of fear than curiosity and opened it to the porch's fading light. No one stood there. Fallen leaves had gathered at the step like a polite crowd. The street was the quiet kind with more trees than cars, where people had learned to use their indoor voice even when they were outdoors. She closed the door. The thermostat clicked again. She glanced at it. 68. She lifted a finger and rolled the wheel to 70, telling herself warm rooms sell. The wheel's needle paused, then fell back to 68 with a soft, decisive little tick, the way a metronome returns to center. She smiled involuntarily, because there was something friendly about a house that liked a particular number, something human in its preferences. All right, she murmured into the woodwork, and kept shooting. The last shot on her list was the view looking down the staircase from the second-floor landing, the kind of image that lets viewers imagine a homecoming or a late-night glass of water. She positioned the tripod at the top step and checked her balance. When she looked through the viewfinder, she saw the newel post, the banister curve, the patterned radiator cover below, and a faint smudge shorter than her knee level moving into the frame, as if someone shorter than she was had peeked and retreated. She pulled back, startled by her own heartbeat. The landing was empty. Dust hung in the air where her movement had woken it. She told herself she was tired. She took the shot. On her way out, she shut lights as she had turned them on, leaving the entry light to burn the way agents preferred welcoming, even to an empty night. The door didn't want to open at first. Then it did, and the house let her out with a little stretch. The porch accepted her steps. She locked the door, tested it twice, and glanced at the front window because people always did. Because something in humans needed to see windows dark when leaving a place they had illuminated. The front window didn't show her. It showed the chandelier's reflection, steady and bright. Back in her apartment later, Mara loaded the memory card and watched the images spool into her editing catalog. She worked methodically, checking exposure, cropping an outlet from a frame, lifting shadows a little to show the grain in the hall floor. At the third image of the dining room archway, she paused. The column of sun along the far wall looked like a shape, but she could tell herself that easily. The mirror shot bothered her more. The frame held a version of the living room in which the chandelier looked, not brighter exactly, but more decided. She shrugged, flagged it for later, and moved on. It wasn't until she checked the metadata that her palms cooled. The timestamps on 5 of the images were wrong, not a few seconds off, but hours, marked just before midnight, when she had been in her car on the way home. She thought her camera might have reset, but the rest of the sequence was exactly right. The odd ones formed their own small island in time, 5 images taken from exactly where she had stood, minutes apart according to the file count, but labeled like postcards sent from another hour. She checked the location data, this camera didn't have it. She checked the system time on her computer, correct. She tried not to remember the thermostat's quiet insistence. The agent texted the next morning, a cheerful string of emojis and a thank you for delivering early. Mara clicked the link to the listing and saw the gallery she had built, cleaned up, arranged to lead the eye. Halfway through, between her dining room shot and the kitchen hero image, there was a picture she had not provided. The foyer, seen from outside through the beveled glass of the door. She hadn't taken any exterior shots. The viewpoint was slightly too low for her height, slightly off-center, as though someone shorter had stood at the window's oval and leaned in curiously. She thought of the smear near her knee level on the staircase shot, and told herself someone else had contributed a photo, the agent perhaps, or a previous photographer. The photo lacked her watermark. She scrolled past it and did not scroll back. That evening, the agent called to say the open house had drawn unusual interest. People had lingered in the foyer. Some had claimed the place felt lively, even without furniture. When asked what they meant, a man with a knit hat had said, "Someone kept walking just ahead, turning lights on for us. It was sweet, like a host." The agent laughed about it later. Mara kept hearing the numeric calm of 68 in the agent's voice, as if the whole conversation had settled at that temperature. Weeks later, after the home sold, Mara returned to the listing out of curiosity and found the photographs updated. The new owners had lived there only a few days before they'd redecorated, and the gallery now showed a runner on the stairs, a plant on the landing, and a mirror mounted in the living room. The mirror, in the photograph, reflected the photographer who had taken the picture. A woman whose camera blinked red for a timer she hadn't set. A woman who looked like Mara, in posture but not in jacket or shoes. The photo held that small extra bulb where none should be. It was a trick of glass. It was the house remembering how to be full. Mara still preferred empty houses. She liked them, but she knocked before she entered for a while after that. She would stand in a quiet doorway and wait for the thermostat to say what it liked, and then she would respect it. Sometimes, not always, a doorbell somewhere in that neighborhood gave a single note as if acknowledging a visitor who wouldn't arrive. Story number 2. There was a night guard who watched over a row of model homes on the edge of a new development. He worked weekends when the sales office was closed, when the fake cookies in the display kitchens had been wrapped and the lights set to a soft dim to save the bulbs. His name was Leon, and he liked the night because it made each staged home honest. Without chatter and showings, the spaces were what they were. Careful shapes meant to suggest a life. Beds made but not slept in. Bowls of plastic apples that seemed patient about their role. The development had been built quickly, a dozen different floor plans on looping streets, names like Meadow Lane and Quiet Brook that had never been meadows or brooks. The models stood shoulder to shoulder at the entrance, each with a sign out front showing the plan name in dignified script. During the day, the homes greeted visitors with a recorded voice in the foyer, "Welcome home," it would say warmly when the motion sensor tripped. At night, the system was supposed to be disabled. Leon had keys for every door, a clipboard for a log, and a pocket flashlight that he almost never used because the homes had night lights built into the baseboards like runways. His rounds were simple. Check each front and back door, walk through each room, note anything that had been moved, anything that shouldn't be. He liked to place a coin somewhere small and harmless, under a vase or by a lamp, to see whether cleaners had come. The coins never moved. Once, the sales manager had teased him about making chores for angels. He shrugged and continued to be private about his coin habit. On his second pass one Saturday, he entered the largest model, the one with the 2-story great room and the dramatic stone fireplace that had never known a flame. As he crossed the threshold, the foyer speaker murmured, "Welcome home," in its daytime voice. He stopped in the doorway. The tablet behind the sales desk showed the system as off. He waited. The voice did not repeat. He wrote it in his log Model 5. Foyer voice triggered and kept walking, telling himself he would check the panel again later. The house smelled faintly of new carpet and cut lumber. The kitchen's under-cabinet lights glowed. In the living room, a television screen sat blank. The television was a fake, a black glass rectangle meant to suggest technology. It couldn't turn on. He passed the dining room table where a place setting had been laid for 6, napkins folded like church hats. A chair was pulled out a few inches farther than he remembered. He pushed it in gently and felt foolish for minding. Upstairs, he did his usual check. 2 guest rooms with neutral quilts, a primary with a headboard of upholstered rectangles. He ran a hand along the linen closet door to make sure it latched. Down the hall, a small bedroom staged as a study held a desk with nothing in the drawers. He knew. He'd checked once. His finger traced the top of the desk. Dust would have told a story, but the place never collected any. Staged homes had a way of slowing time. Without cooking and laundry, there was less of life to measure. On his third pass, around 2 a.m., he entered the smallest model, the one they called the Starter's Delight, which made him smile even in the dark, because nothing about it felt simple. He slid his key into the lock and heard something on the other side of the door step away, the way a sound shifts when a space makes room for you. He opened into the foyer. "Welcome home," the speaker said again, as if someone on a loop had been practicing kindness for hours and couldn't quite stop. He walked the room slowly. In the kitchen, he had left a coin a quarter, slid behind a ceramic bowl of lemons. The quarter had turned a few degrees, so that the eagle faced a different direction. He told himself he might have knocked the bowl earlier. He placed the quarter back and smoothed the runner with the heel of his hand. Upstairs, he found the thermostat at 65 in every model, a cool, steady decision. He had set them that way early in the shift. Now he noticed the numbers, not just as numbers but as a rhythm, 6 and 5, the soft slope downward like a sigh. He liked numbers. Numbers were permitted to be calm. When he reached the model with the corner lot, the thermostat read 56. He turned it back to 65, and, on a whim he would not be able to explain, wrote the digits on his log and circled them. When he walked to the next house, the number sat on his tongue, 56, like a phrase in a language he almost remembered. He shook it off with a small laugh at himself and let the night take his attention again. The sales office sat between two of the models, a bright cubby by day, an aquarium at night. He rested there to drink water and check the camera feeds on the monitor. He watched himself move through living rooms on a 10-second delay, a slightly future version of him popping in and out of frameless windows. On one feed, the built-in speakers in the corner of a ceiling flashed a tiny red dot, as if they'd received a signal. The screen went black for a blink and then returned to its stillness. He made a note. Check the tablet system off. System off, and let it go. He saved the model with the two staircases for last, because he liked the way the two sets of steps made the house feel like a puzzle you could hold in your head. The back staircase rose softly from the kitchen. The main staircase curved from the foyer. He walked them both, listening to how his tread sounded on each. The foyer stairs made polite little whispers. The kitchen steps sounded like a conversation held a room away. At the top landing, between two empty bedrooms, he saw for the first time a door that had not been there on his second pass. A narrow pocket door slid slightly open to reveal a linen closet that seemed to have grown into the wall with its shelves already stocked with folded towels. He remembered that closet. It belonged to a different plan. He stepped closer. The closet smelled like clean cotton, which made sense, and like rain, which did not. He looked away and back, and found that the door looked exactly as it should, built into the plan, part of the map as if it had always been. He closed the pocket door and heard it click in a way that was too satisfying to be a sound heard only once. When he reached the front door to log his exit, a flyer tucked into the door handle caught his attention. It was the same brochure they handed to visitors: granite options, paint swatches, a smiling couple on a deck that hadn't been built yet, but this one had a pen mark at the top, a quick loop like a signature, and the word sold, penciled next to the plan name. He had not seen a pencil in any of the models. Pens were for desks that belonged to people. He touched the paper. It felt freshly creased. He considered taking it to the office and decided to leave it, preferring to see what the morning crew would say. He tucked it a little more securely so it wouldn't fall. Near dawn, when the wide road beyond the subdivision took its first commuter, Leon made one more pass. The sky did that gray surrender it always did just before light. He walked into the first model, the biggest one, and stood for a moment in the foyer listening to the electrical whisper that well-built houses have, a hum like a bench of bees far away. The foyer speaker did not greet him. He exhaled and let his shoulders drop. As he turned to go, he noticed his reflection in the rectangular mirror near the door, a mirror meant to help visitors imagine keys and last looks. His reflection stood where he stood, hand on the knob, cap brim low. Over his reflection's shoulder, farther inside the house, another version of the foyer stood at a slightly different angle, like a photograph of the same space taken from a different height. He knew mirrors did that, offered parallax in architects' dreams. Still, he held his breath once, and then laughed at himself. He opened the door to the morning. On Monday, the sales manager called him with a question. "Hey, did you mark a flyer?" she asked. "We found a sold slip on the Starter's Delight. Cute, but we haven't sold that lot." Leon explained. The manager paused. We also got a camera notification at 3:17. Someone said welcome home in Model 5. He told her about the motion sensor speaking up on its own. Weird, she said. We'll get the audio panel replaced. That afternoon, a family came in. The kind of family brochures seemed to predict a couple and a boy with a toy car clutched in one hand. They walked through Model 5 with the sales manager, who later recounted the visit in a cheerful ramble. They loved the room sizes, she said, and the kid went straight up the back stairs like he knew the way. He stood in the upstairs hall and said, "We've been here before," which kids say all the time. Then he asked if the voice would say hello again. I told him that only happens during open houses. She laughed, the kind of laugh that invites agreement. It's good marketing. Leon walked his rounds the following weekend, coins exactly where he'd left them, chairs inch perfect, thermostats at 65 without complaint. He paused in the corner lot model and looked for the pocket door and found it, of course, where it had always been. He looked for signs of rain and smelled only clean. In the starter's delight, he checked the door handle. No flyer, no pencil marks. He wondered whether he had dreamed the handwriting or whether someone had come in the morning and tossed it without a thought. Either way, the fact had been folded into the day. On his last night before the development's grand opening, a low fog settled across the lawns, making the models look like ships in a very calm harbor. He did his 5 passes because he liked ritual, and also because ritual is a polite way to ask a place to behave. In the smallest house, he stood in the foyer and let the across-the-street streetlight cast a soft sequence of moving light through the blinds as cars hissed past. For no reason other than his own curiosity, he whispered, "Welcome home," into the air. And the room held it. A small phrase that nested in the drywall like a gentled moth. He waited for the speaker to mimic him, and it didn't. Outside, the foghorns of a highway a mile away sounded like someone's breath catching. When he finished his shift and signed the last line on his log, he noticed the numbers he'd circled on a previous night, 56, right under his signature. He didn't know why he'd circled them. He left them circled. Later, when the lots sold, someone would tell him that house numbers ended at 55 on one side and started at 57 on the other, an odd hiccup in the developer's plan. There was no lot 56. If the houses wanted a number that didn't exist, that was their business. He had known other places that would have liked to belong to a story, and he could respect it. He kept working nights for a while. He stopped setting coins, because the idea of proof that nothing moved didn't comfort him as much as it used to. He preferred the idea that a chair might shift an inch out of place when a room remembered that families sometimes push chairs back suddenly and stand to laugh. He listened for the foyer speakers and heard them only when faces came pressed against the glass with brochures in their hands. If the recorded voice ever spoke when no one was there, it had learned not to do it when he could hear. In the models that became homes, lights took on the shape of dinners and homework, and a pair of tired shoulders. In the models that waited, the baseboard lights went on, making runways through rooms that had practiced welcoming and would again. If he saw himself in a mirror again at a slightly wrong angle, he didn't mention it. He just tipped his cap to the polite version of himself in glass and kept his boots from squeaking on floors that had asked to be quiet for one more night. Story number 3. There was a survey technician who specialized in saving old houses by drawing them exactly as they were. Her name was Anika, and she worked for a small preservation nonprofit that sent her with a tripod and a quiet laser scanner to places that were about to be moved, lifted, or restored. The houses she measured were empty, most of the time cleared out, key under a loose brick, utility meters sleeping. She liked them that way. It let her hear the way an old floor spoke when no one was rushing over it. One late winter morning, wind moved the grasses in long, patient waves around a farmhouse that stood alone at the edge of a stalled development. The county had taken ownership. A builder would relocate the house rather than tear it down. Anika parked on the gravel shoulder, let the engine tick to cool, and listened to the field. The porch steps were bowed a little. One plank had a pale oval where a doormat used to be. The front door had both a modern deadbolt and an older keyhole with a key that looked like a piece of jewelry. The email had said the alarm was off. Her hand found the right brass shape. The lock turned in a way that felt embarrassed by its own age. Inside, the rooms held a gentle cold. The air smelled like plaster and unpainted wood. The front parlor had 2 windows facing south. Light softened the corners. A square of sun lay on the floorboards like a patient animal. In the dining room, a built-in cabinet wore the imprint of plates long gone. In the kitchen, someone had left a ceramic canister with a chalkboard panel on it, the kind that invites a word like sugar or tea. The panel was blank, but held the perfect, faint ghost of handwriting under the erased black. Anika set her tripod in the center of the foyer. Her scanner was a small, clever box that rotated with a whir as soft as a cat's breath. It would throw a net of light across the room and bring the distances back to her laptop as a point cloud, a glitter-fine map she could later pull into a plan. She liked the translation, the way a house became millions of dots, and then, with patience, a drawing that honored what it had been. The first scan went as usual. She watched the software sketch the room in gray dust. The stairs' curve appeared, the doorways, the chair rail. She placed targets on walls for the scanner to find. Small white dots like careful moths. On her second pass in the dining room, the scan reported a wall length 3 inches shorter than the tape measured. She checked her tape against a baseline. The numbers disagreed politely. She picked a number to trust and moved on. Upstairs, the hall ran straight with 4 doors and a small window at the end where the glass had seed bubble flaws. She scanned the first bedroom, a small square with a slanting ceiling. The scanner hummed, and in the laptop preview, Anika saw what she always saw, a clean little room made of points. Then, as she watched, a thin void slid across the floor in the scan, like a shadow without a source, an absence shaped as if something low to the ground had passed between the scanner and the far wall. She blinked, looked up, found only a mat of winter light and her tripod. When she looked back down, the scan had finished, the floor perfect. Data hiccup, she told herself. She set the scanner again. When she reached the second bedroom, the closet door was open. Inside there was a single wooden rod, nothing else. A faint pencil line ran at waist height across the back wall with numbers marked every foot or so. 1, 2, 3, and then half marks. She recognized a previous surveyor's habit. At the 11-foot mark there was a little star, a shape someone had drawn without thinking. She smiled involuntarily at the small kinship of measurement. She raised the scanner, paused, and looked closer. The star had 8 points, a neat little asterisk. A memory nudged at her of thermostats that liked 68, of a real estate photographer who had once told her a story over coffee. Anika let the nudge float away. The kitchen was almost empty, which made it rich in sound. Pipes ticked in the walls. A single drop fell from somewhere and hit a metal rim with a sound like a pin. The house had no appliances left. The breaker panel in the back hall had its switches taped open, a courtesy from the county. She stood still to listen for a refrigerator hum. That did not exist. The quiet had its own tide. It rose and fell as the day turned its face. She chalked a datum on the foyer floor to 0, the point the plan would call home. She measured the stair rise. 11 steps with a half rise at the turn. An odd count that old houses sometimes had. On paper, she wrote, 11 plus 1, 2. Numbers like to sit together in old places, repeating softly, the way a family repeats a meal that worked. In the basement, which was more a thick crawl space, someone had mounted a small chalkboard in a frame near the furnace. It was clean, except for a soft film of chalk dust. She left a date and her initials in the corner and came back up with grit in her cuffs. The back door needed 2 pushes to latch. She scanned the kitchen, then the big room next to it with the mantel. Some hearths are loud even when unlit. This one had learned to be quiet. The scanner caught its frame in neat right angles. The fireplace had tiles you could tell someone had cleaned often. Halfway through the main floor, she discovered a door she didn't remember, the kind of shallow door that houses tuck into themselves for brooms. It sat between the dining room and the hall, where she was sure there had been only wall earlier. She put her hand on the knob. The door opened to reveal shallow shelves with nothing on them, painted a color between mushroom and feather gray. The paint had worn in arcs where hands had reached long ago. She had walked this wall. She had set a target near this very spot. She closed the door gently. It fit the casing perfectly. It belonged like a solved riddle belongs. Anika liked the discipline of not talking to herself when she worked. She'd learned that houses sometimes listen too closely. Still, a little thought escaped. "Good," she said, as if to the scanner when it found a corner after a blur. The laptop logged the coordinates. The kitchen wall, measured twice, changed its mind by a half inch. The stair landing gained a quarter degree. Buildings settle. Instruments drift. Her pencil recorded the numbers like good manners. She took a break by the upstairs window, letting the thin winter sunlight warm her wrists. A bird crossed the bright square in a silence too quick to catch with a camera. She placed the scanner on the hallway floor and let it spin. In the preview, she watched the hallway grow its points and, near the end of the run, saw a vertical line of absence where the scanner had skipped a clean, thin nothing between two of the doors at a height lower than the knobs. On the physical wall in that spot, there was a slight scuff, the kind a box leaves when it bumps its way through a move. She went back to the basement chalkboard because the furnace room had a way of showing what kept a place alive. Her initials were where she had left them. Beside them, faint but there, someone had written 6, 8. The slash could have been a divide or a date. It could have been nothing at all but marks left by a previous hand. She ran a finger over the chalk. It was dry and old. The numbers had the softness of time on them. In her pocket, her phone buzzed with a message from her boss. Send a preliminary plan when you can. She sent a picture of the foyer scan like a postcard. Nice bones, she wrote. The house took the rest of the day like a narrative. The scanner moved, the light moved. The numbers told the same story with slight differences. Annika measured the distance from the newel post to the wall 3 times, as though the house had asked her to. 11 feet 6, then 11 feet 5 3/4, then 11 feet 6 again. She laughed once into her scarf, an apology to any math that minded being teased. As she packed the scanner for a last pass, a sound came from the back door, a light knuckle on wood, 2 taps like a rhythm a friend uses before entering. She watched the door's edge. The latch held. She stepped closer, turned the knob and eased the door open to a gray yard and a shallow dish of sky. No one stood on the stoop. The field said hush, in a language grasses know. She closed the door and looked at the latch. It seated itself with a neat, quiet click. When she finally sat in her car, the day had softened into that hour winter keeps for itself. She drank water and ate a granola bar and waited for the laptop to finish rendering the points. The farmhouse appeared as a small galaxy. She rotated it with her thumb. The model was almost perfect except for a small seam along the downstairs hallway where 2 scans refused to become one. She adjusted the tolerance. The seam softened but kept a whisper of misalignment, like a sentence spoken twice in different rooms. In the corner of the basement model, in the noise of the point cloud, a faint rectangle hovered at an angle, as if a picture frame hung where she hadn't seen one. The report went out that night. Plan view, elevations, notes about the plaster condition, a gentle recommendation to lift the house by the chimney in the north corner. The builder replied in the morning with a quick thanks and a question. Did she have a version of the plan without the closet she had drawn between the dining room and hall? He included a photo taken by his crew years ago, a wide shot of that wall, blank. She answered with her own photos. The closet was right there, painted a color between mushroom and feather gray. The builder smiled in emails you could feel and explained that these houses sometimes surprised you. He would build the new foundation with a little flex in that area, just in case. They moved the farmhouse a month later, at night, along a slow road lined with people who came out of their own houses to watch a house take a walk. Annika was there with her camera, a citizen of the event rather than an author of it. The building's windows glowed with safety lights. She could see the plan inside herself as the house passed. 11 steps and a turn. A closet that had perhaps decided to exist again. A chalkboard where her initials might still be. When the truck idled at the new lot, a street lamp shone through one of the upstairs panes and made a pale design on the wall opposite. It looked like the numbers 5 and 6 standing side by side, but that was a trick of light and partition. She told herself so and believed it. Later, when she visited the farmhouse in its new place to take after measurements, the tape matched the plan exactly, down to the half-inch that had gone wandering on her first day. The seam in the model had vanished under the real seams that had been repaired. The basement chalkboard bore new handwriting measurements from a plumber and a note that said turn off, beneath which, very faint, 6, 8, still weighted like a fraction kept for another class. She did not tell anyone the small thing she discovered on her last visit, that when she stood in the upstairs hall and looked toward the room with the closet, the air seemed to thicken the way air does over heat. She stood very still, and a pressure she recognized from houses that did not wish to be bothered eased. She said nothing aloud, But in her head, she thanked the house for letting itself be drawn. It felt, in the silence that followed, like someone had accepted the thanks in the old language of hinges and quiet. Back in her office, Anika kept a pencil drawing of the farmhouse pinned above her computer. It showed the stair, the new porch, the soft slope of the roofline. In the margin, she had written a small reminder to herself in careful block letters. Measure twice, listen once, and then let the house have the last number. Story number 4. There was a sound designer who took jobs others thought too trivial, capturing room tone, the ambient hush of a place, the breath of a building held for long seconds. His name was Theo. Documentary crews called him at the end of a shoot, when they realized their editors needed a minute of clean quiet for transitions. Realtors called him too, sometimes, to make their video tours feel like someone had actually stood inside the rooms. He liked those calls because empty houses make a particular sound, a soft mix of HVAC sighs, the high whisper of distant traffic, the tiny ticks of expansion and rest. One evening in early spring, a local museum asked Theo to record an hour of night silence inside a post-war bungalow they planned to recreate in an exhibit. The owners had moved out, the furniture was gone. The house was a modest square with a picture window, a carport where the wind made its round, and a porch light that had not yet remembered to be replaced. The neighbor had left a key under a ceramic frog. The museum promised a small stipend and access after sunset. Theo loaded his case, 2 small condenser microphones, a pair of Omni mics on tall stands, a portable recorder with a red light as small as a heartbeat, and a coil of cables that he always wrapped and unwrapped with more care than he gave to his own clothes. The bungalow's door opened easily. The house greeted him with that blank, tender feeling empty houses have, as if holding breath for the right footsteps. The thermostat on the hall wall read 68. He smiled at the number and left it alone. In the living room, the carpet had been pulled to expose a warm-colored floor with a few half-moon marks where a sofa's feet used to be. The kitchen had a window over the sink. Beyond it, dark set down softly. Somewhere, a single drip found metal and made its small, patient sound. Theo set the Omni mics in the living room, pointed not at anything but at the center of the emptiness. He put one condenser between the kitchen and hall, aiming to catch whichever direction the house breathed. He strung a cable down the short hallway and placed the 4th mic on a stand in the almost square bedroom. On his recorder, he labeled the tracks L, K, H, Brone, Amb. He listened in the headphones to the room he was already in. The sound arrived as a fine band of air, with a faint rhythmic texture he had learned to hear pipe ticks that softened like far rain, the refrigerator hum that wasn't there because the fridge had been removed, and a high tone from the streetlights that only sometimes showed up. He did a sweep with a hand clap to hear the reverb. The clap came back at him like a memory, short, clear, with a tail that said plaster, not drywall. He made a note. 0.4s. RT60 est. His pencil was unusually loud in the quiet. Before letting the recorder run, he walked the rooms with a small step, no heavy footfalls, and listened the old-fashioned way. In the kitchen, the smoke detector gave a single high chirp, as if testing a battery that knew the result already. He stood under it, waiting a minute, another minute. The second chirp came not from the kitchen, but from the hall. He moved to the hall. The third came from the bedroom. Low battery chirps take their time, he knew, sometimes 65 seconds between calls. He reached up to twist the detector from the base. It came away easily. He removed its battery and set both apart on the counter. He waited. A chirp sounded from somewhere else, a device he hadn't spotted. He tracked it to the living room and found another detector mounted higher than he could reach without a chair. He made a decision. Leave them be and see whether their slow conversation would sew itself into the recording. Some nights, you let the place speak. At 9, he hit record. The red light warmed. He left the mics to do what mics do and sat on the floor to be small and still. A house sounds different when someone moves through it and when someone lets it go on without interruption. He took off the headphones and leaned against the wall. From outside came a soft, 2-note rhythm of cars on a distant street. Inside, the little ticks continued, the low frequency of air, a small whir from something that did not exist anymore, except in the memory of a circuit. When he checked the recorder after 10 minutes, a small pattern had emerged on the screen. A spike every minute or so in the hallway mic, and then, slightly later, in the living room mic, chirp, pause, chirp. 70 seconds, 60, 65. He wrote the times down, and then stopped, because measuring seemed like rudeness in a place like this. He wore the headphones for a while, and closed his eyes. Through the near silence came something that wasn't a word, but behaved like one, a gentle rising and falling of air at the end of the hall. 2 beats together, the shape of welcome without the letters to claim it. He could have been imposing a story on the noise floor. He allowed for that possibility. The possibility did not stop the feeling. At 9:30, he tried something he sometimes tried. He played a sine tone, at a low volume, through a tiny speaker to hear how a room colored it. He chose a home frequency the size of this house often liked. The tone glided into the air, and returned to him fattened in certain corners, thinned in others, the way soup tastes different at the edge of a bowl. In the bedroom, the tone met the wall and made a small standing wave, a place where sound stayed in place. Then the hallway took it and made it walk. He turned the tone off and listened to the aftersound, which wasn't sound so much as the house's small mechanical voice settling its code again. A neighbor's porch light clicked. A sprinkler somewhere sighed. On Theo's recorder, the living room mic caught a soft shuff near the floor, the exact noise of a light touch moving across wood. He looked, expecting a draft shifting dust. The air was still. The waveform showed the shuff as a petal-shaped swell, a kind of sound he associated with cloth against a knee, or with nothing at all but expectation finding a surface. Near 11, the kitchen chirp grew tired and stopped. The hall chirp continued for a while longer, then rested. The house made a sound like fabric being folded and put away, a duct returning to its evening shape. Theo stood to stretch. He walked the perimeter of the living room with his hand a few inches from the wall, not touching, just sensing the coolness of the plaster. At the picture window, he looked out at the street. The trees were mostly dark except for their edges, which had taken on a small light from a neighbor's lamp. He thought he saw someone walking a dog, the leash making the quiet geometry leashes make at night. He watched until the shape turned the corner and wasn't. He checked the thermostat again without meaning to. It still read 68 with the kind of insistence thermostats have when no one argues back. He told the house quietly, "I'll leave it how you like it." Which was a silly thing to say to a number and to a wall. But the saying suited the hour. Shortly after midnight, he moved to the doorway between hall and kitchen to read his notes under the dim light from the window. His pencil left a line and then another, and then paused because, on the page near the margin, a word he didn't remember writing had appeared in his own hand: home. He stared at it, smiled at his own mind for being generous with him, and underlined it very lightly. He did not say the word aloud. It did not need that. He let the recorder run for a full hour without touching it. He sat on the step at the threshold to the carport, the door propped with a wedge, and listened to the night from a house's mouth. Through the open space, he heard the neighbor's wind chimes play 3 notes by accident and then one on purpose. A moth found the porch light and patted it once, with the patience moths have for glass. When he returned to the living room to stop the recorder, he stepped around the mics the way he would step around a sleeping animal. Back in his studio the next morning, he poured the tracks into his editing software. The waveforms were clean and familiar. He listened with good headphones, the kind that keep the world politely outside. The living room's track was a slow river of hush. The hallway track held the chirps, each spaced with almost care. The bedroom track had a low, almost inaudible pulse, like someone keeping time 2 rooms away. He expanded that section. The pulse, when magnified, moved in pairs. 2 soft rises, a rest, 2 soft rises. He could map it. He chose to leave it alone. He looked for anomalies because the internet had trained him to. There were a few. A small spike around 23 minutes that could have been a far siren folded into the house. A brief higher frequency at 56 minutes that might be the neighbor's light. A tiny curve in the noise floor that traced the shape of a breath where he knew he had not taken one. In the spectrogram view, a faint horizontal band wavered around a frequency that, when converted in his head to a musical note, landed near a tone he associated with living rooms. He did not think too much of that association. He let the work be work. The museum loved the recording. They layered it beneath a slideshow of photographs for their fundraising page. The empty rooms of the bungalow, the textured sunlight on the walls, a close-up of a smoke detector whose plastic had yellowed gently with time. Comments under the video said things like, "This made me feel calm," and "I can hear my grandmother's kitchen in this. Is that silly?" One comment, posted late at night by a username made of numbers, read, "At 3:17, there are 2 syllables. Listen with good headphones." Theo listened again at that point and heard what he had heard in the house, the shape of a word without the lettered obligation to be one. He typed "room tone" as a reply and left it there. A few weeks later, the real estate listing went live. The agent used Theo's audio under their video tour, and people watched on their couches with sound at the volume where a house's quiet stands in for their own. The first open house drew more than a few pairs of socks across the floors. Visitors told the agent how peaceful it felt, how kind the walls seemed. A boy stood in the hall and told his mother to be quiet, not in the way children scold, but the way they invite the world to listen to something only they can hear. When the house sold, the new owners asked for a copy of the recording. They wanted the night sound of their rooms saved from the time when they held nothing but the idea of a future. The museum sent Theo's file on a flash drive with a note. Recorded at 68 degrees, spring, between 9 p.m. and midnight. He smiled at the specificity and at the superstition of numbers, which humans toy with when trying to hold on to a feeling. Theo took other jobs after that: gymnasiums, chapels, an office after hours that turned out not to have any air in it at all, but the hum of light fixtures. When he thought of the bungalow, he thought not of the faint syllables or the way the chirps had wandered from ceiling to ceiling, but of the sensation of sitting on the step, halfway inside and halfway out, letting the room be its own story. He kept a short clip of that recording on his phone. On flights, when turbulence encouraged strangers to grip armrests, he listened to the steady quiet of a house that had waited for someone to come home and then, politely, had waited some more. Story number 5. There was a locksmith who didn't mind working alone in the kind of quiet that makes a house sound like it's thinking. Her name was Lena. Property managers called her when leases turned and sellers wanted new keys before a "for sale" sign had the courage to go in the yard. She liked the honesty of a door that didn't pretend. Cylinders and pins, springs no bigger than lashes. A key cut to a language. Only a lock and a hand could speak. On an overcast weekday, a manager sent her to a small brick duplex at the end of a cul-de-sac, where the streetlights came on a few minutes early. The place was empty cleaned, carpets lifted, fresh paint drying in a color with 2 names. The email said, "Front and back, garage side door if present, leave 2 sets, thermostat on hold for showings." A lockbox hung on the rail with a 4-digit code. She pressed the numbers in a rhythm she knew by heart. The last 2 digits looked like they had been worn deeper, 6 and 8, just enough to catch the light. Inside, the air was the kind that holds the scent of a mild cleaner and half-remembered coffee. The entry was small, with a mirror that gave back a careful rectangle of Lena and the hall. The thermostat on the wall held itself at 68 as politely as a handshake. She set her toolkit down on a folded moving blanket and opened it in a quiet, practiced fan. Follower, tweezers, pinning kit, spare cylinders, markers, a few brass blanks lined like patient teeth. The front cylinder came out easily. She backed the retaining clip off and eased the plug into her palm. 6 chambers, like most. She tipped the stack onto the cloth and watched the pins tumble as if the night sky had let go of a few extra stars. She set new bottom pins according to the code the manager had texted and left a tiny master wafer where it wanted to be an accommodation that would let one more cut open the same door if it had to. She'd do that now and then for convenience, when the march of keys through a season asked for it. The wafer was the thickness of a thought. While she worked, the house made house sounds. The return vent breathed. Somewhere a duct clicked. From outside, a car rolled past, its tires whispering over a seam in the pavement, like an old friend greeting a threshold. In the quiet between those, she heard a single, soft chime from the doorbell. Not a full press, the kind of note a fingertip makes when it's testing manners. She looked at the door. No shadow under the sill, no blur through the beveled glass. She smiled once, because she'd come to expect that emptiness has a sense of humor about arrivals. She put the bell on her mental list to mention, finished pinning, and slid the plug back. The key turned as if it had practiced. She labeled 2 keys in her neat block letters and hung them on a fob. 1237. Brick front. The back door would be keyed alike. The garage, maybe. Managers like same. Key sets. The back lock sat in a door that had known afternoon Sunday. The cylinder was older. A different brand painted the color of brass in summer. She pulled it. Found 5 chambers, not 6. The keyway had a different opinion about things. In her pin bag, she chose a tailpiece that could meet it halfway and match the front's code as closely as the metal would allow. The bolt slid, the knob turned, and the door showed her the shallow yard, the way a house bows. She liked to pause in each room after a lock turned the first time, to let the house register a small change in its life. She stood in the living room where the carpet was gone, the floor's grain a soft map. The mirror by the entry caught her from a gentle angle, one that scaled her down a little, as if the house were adjusting the distance to make itself less empty. The reflection included, impossibly, more of the hall's side wall than it should have, a slight widening like a breath drawn out. She tilted her head, and the mirror behaved again like a mirror. In the kitchen, she found a drawer of things no one takes when they move. A packet of felt pads, 3 screws that almost matched. A key tag from a hardware store with a number stamped into it. 56. She turned the tag over. The back was blank but worn, the way metal smooths after years in a pocket. She set it on the counter and left it there, a small anonymous history that didn't ask for more. The garage side door stuck at the threshold then gave, and she knocked rust from the latch with a laugh under her breath. She liked stubborn doors, the way an old dog sometimes tests you by not rising until you say please. While she replaced that cylinder, she heard another soft chime, the same note as the front doorbell but further away, or lower, as if a bell had remembered its voice from around a corner. She paused with the follower in place, bolts half turned inside her hand. The house settled. A yard of wind moved at the edge of hearing outside. She finished her work and wrote a small note on the service tag she always left. Rekeyed 3 exterior, matched to 58,668. Test, smooth. Thermostat left at 68. Before she left, she did a sweep. The duplex had 2 bedrooms at the back. In the first, the closet had bifold doors that tracked too smoothly for their age. A length of blue tape marked 68 inches on the wall, the kind of note painters leave for themselves. She worked the bifolds once, because doors like to be asked to move even when no one's watching. In the second bedroom, the closet was a reach-in with a single shelf. On the shelf sat a square of paper, a cutout from a calendar with June ringed in a pencil loop and the number 8 quietly circled. She lifted it and put it back where it had been, and left the room feeling she had closed a small loop that didn't mind being closed. At the front door, she tested her key twice, felt the pins rise and settle, heard the bolt lay itself down. As she turned to leave, the thermostat clicked with that little radio soldier sound thermostats make when they decide the hour. She traced the wall once with her eyes, as if thanking it for behaving politely. On the sidewalk, she sent the manager a photo of the 2 key sets on the kitchen counter and locked the box on the rail. The last light in the house she left on was the small entry sconce. Houses like a nightlight as much as people do. The call came the next day just after lunch. "Hey, strange one," the manager said. Casual. "Front's great. Back was great last night. This morning my runner says the old key opens the back again." He laughed in a way that invited her to laugh too, as if he'd said the punchline first. She didn't. She drove back with her kit and found the back door doing a trick she didn't like. She tried the new key. It worked. She tried the old key the manager had set aside and wrapped in a rubber band with a note. Old back. It worked too. She took the cylinder out on the mat and opened it in the light. A master wafer sat where she'd seated it, and another thinner balanced above it like a polite guest who hadn't introduced itself. She hadn't put that second wafer there. It had a patina, a soft rounding at its edge, as if it had learned the shape of the chamber a while ago. She held it in tweezers and thought. She could remove it and leave a single key system the way property managers like, or she could note what was obvious to her in that moment, that this door had wanted to hold 2 stories at once and had found a way without asking. She felt foolish putting it like that, even in her own head. She reset the stacks carefully, left the 2 waifs where they had learned to sit, and cut one more key whose bidding matched the ghost in the hardware. She labeled it with a small star next to the address and placed it with the other sets in the kitchen and wrote on her service tag, Mastered to accept previous key until transfer complete. Remove on request. While she was bent over the cylinder, the front doorbell did its little test note again, and the back door opened on its hinges a few inches, as if someone had thought to step out onto the stoop and then reconsidered. The house's air changed slightly, the way air learns the story of an opening and closing, then went still. She stepped to the door and looked at the yard. Wind moved a small piece of a tag in the grass. The neighbor's chime stitched a careful song and stopped. On her way out, she checked the mirror. Her reflection stood as it should, keys at. Only a lock and a hand could speak. On an overcast weekday, a manager sent her to a small brick duplex at the end of a cul-de-sac, where the streetlights came on a few minutes early. The place was empty cleaned, carpets lifted, fresh paint drying in a color with 2 names. The email said, "Front and back, garage side door if present, leave 2 sets. Thermostat on hold for showings." A lockbox hung on the rail with a 4-digit code. She pressed the numbers in a rhythm she knew by heart. The last 2 digits looked like they had been worn deeper, 6 and 8, just enough to catch the light. Inside, the air was the kind that holds the scent of a mild cleaner and half-remembered coffee. The entry was small, with a mirror that gave back a careful rectangle of Lena and the hall. The thermostat on the wall held itself at 68 as politely as a handshake. She set her toolkit down on a folded moving blanket and opened it in a quiet, practiced fan. Follower, tweezers, pinning kit, spare cylinders, markers, a few brass blanks lined like patient teeth. The front cylinder came out easily. She backed the retaining clip off and eased the plug into her palm. 6 chambers, like most. She tipped the stack onto the cloth and watched the pins tumble as if the night sky had let go of a few extra stars. She set new bottom pins according to the code the manager had texted and left a tiny master wafer where it wanted to be an accommodation that would let one more cut open the same door if it had to. She'd do that now and then for convenience, when the march of keys through a season asked for it. The wafer was the thickness of a thought. While she worked, the house made house sounds. The return vent breathed. Somewhere a duct clicked. From outside, a car rolled past, its tires whispering over a seam in the pavement, like an old friend greeting a threshold. In the quiet between those, she heard a single, soft chime from the doorbell. Not a full press, the kind of note a fingertip makes when it's testing manners. She looked at the door. No shadow under the sill, no blur through the beveled glass. She smiled once, because she'd come to expect that emptiness has a sense of humor about arrivals. She put the bell on her mental list to mention, finished pinning, and slid the plug back. The key turned as if it had practiced. She labeled 2 keys in her neat block letters and hung them on a fob. 1237. Brick front. The back door would be keyed alike. The garage, maybe. Managers like same. Key sets. The back lock sat in a door that had known afternoon Sunday. The cylinder was older. A different brand painted the color of brass in summer. She pulled it. Found 5 chambers, not 6. The keyway had a different opinion about things. In her pin bag, she chose a tailpiece that could meet it halfway and match the front's code as closely as the metal would allow. The bolt slid, the knob turned, and the door showed her the shallow yard, the way a house bows. She liked to pause in each room after a lock turned the first time, to let the house register a small change in its life. She stood in the living room where the carpet was gone, the floor's grain a soft map. The mirror by the entry caught her from a gentle angle, one that scaled her down a little, as if the house were adjusting the distance to make itself less empty. The reflection included, impossibly, more of the hall's side wall than it should have, a slight widening like a breath drawn out. She tilted her head, and the mirror behaved again like a mirror. In the kitchen, she found a drawer of things no one takes when they move. A packet of felt pads, 3 screws that almost matched. A key tag from a hardware store with a number stamped into it. 56. She turned the tag over. The back was blank but worn, the way metal smooths after years in a pocket. She set it on the counter and left it there, a small anonymous history that didn't ask for more. The garage side door stuck at the threshold then gave, and she knocked rust from the latch with a laugh under her breath. She liked stubborn doors, the way an old dog sometimes tests you by not rising until you say please. While she replaced that cylinder, she heard another soft chime, the same note as the front doorbell but further away, or lower, as if a bell had remembered its voice from around a corner. She paused with the follower in place, bolts half turned inside her hand. The house settled. A yard of wind moved at the edge of hearing outside. She finished her work and wrote a small note on the service tag she always left. Rekeyed 3 exterior, matched to 58,668. Test, smooth. Thermostat left at 68. Before she left, she did a sweep. The duplex had 2 bedrooms at the back. In the first, the closet had bifold doors that tracked too smoothly for their age. A length of blue tape marked 68 inches on the wall, the kind of note painters leave for themselves. She worked the bifolds once, because doors like to be asked to move even when no one's watching. In the second bedroom, the closet was a reach-in with a single shelf. On the shelf sat a square of paper, a cutout from a calendar with June ringed in a pencil loop and the number 8 quietly circled. She lifted it and put it back where it had been, and left the room feeling she had closed a small loop that didn't mind being closed. At the front door, she tested her key twice, felt the pins rise and settle, heard the bolt lay itself down. As she turned to leave, the thermostat clicked with that little radio soldier sound thermostats make when they decide the hour. She traced the wall once with her eyes, as if thanking it for behaving politely. On the sidewalk, she sent the manager a photo of the 2 key sets on the kitchen counter and locked the box on the rail. The last light in the house she left on was the small entry sconce. Houses like a nightlight as much as people do. The call came the next day just after lunch. "Hey, strange one," the manager said. Casual. "Front's great. Back was great last night. This morning my runner says the old key opens the back again." He laughed in a way that invited her to laugh too, as if he'd said the punchline first. She didn't. She drove back with her kit and found the back door doing a trick she didn't like. She tried the new key. It worked. She tried the old key the manager had set aside and wrapped in a rubber band with a note. "Old back." It worked too. She took the cylinder out on the mat and opened it in the light. A master wafer sat where she'd seated it, and another thinner balanced above it like a polite guest who hadn't introduced itself. She hadn't put that second wafer there. It had a patina, a soft rounding at its edge, as if it had learned the shape of the chamber a while ago. She held it in tweezers and thought. She could remove it and leave a single-key system the way property managers like, or she could note what was obvious to her in that moment, that this door had wanted to hold 2 stories at once and had found a way without asking. She felt foolish putting it like that, even in her own head. She reset the stacks carefully, left the 2 waifs where they had learned to sit, and cut one more key whose bidding matched the ghost in the hardware. She labeled it with a small star next to the address and placed it with the other sets in the kitchen and wrote on her service tag, "Mastered to accept previous key until transfer complete. Remove on request." While she was bent over the cylinder, the front doorbell did its little test note again, and the back door opened on its hinges a few inches, as if someone had thought to step out onto the stoop and then reconsidered. The house's air changed slightly, the way air learns the story of an opening and closing, then went still. She stepped to the door and looked at the yard. Wind moved a small piece of a tag in the grass. The neighbor's chime stitched a careful song and stopped. On her way out, she checked the mirror. Her reflection stood as it should, keys at. Listened to the heater breathe. The tone of the room had a different center than his other cabins. The air held a shape, a 2-syllable rise and fall that his brain could have made from the sound of electricity and the distant weight of wind. He remembered something a sound designer had once told him about room tone, about the way a house learns voices, and then, without mischief, practices them when there's no one to hear. He left the thermostat where it sat and wrote in his notebook, 568. Leave today. He would come back at dusk and decide. Snow fell and erased footprints. He went to the maintenance shed to warm his fingers and drink from a mug that had belonged to the caretaker before him. It had a chip that fit his thumb. The radio mumbled a game 2 counties over. He looked at the map of the resort pinned to the corkboard and noticed a tiny thing he'd never noticed. The cabins were numbered up one side of the lane and down the other, 1 through 15, except the one corner where 6 should have been was green space, and the count jumped to 7. A survey quirk, probably. The previous caretaker's pencil had made a note years ago, no 6 on Mapland Trust parcel. Next to that, in different pencil, open day 6, 8, In late afternoon, Cal made his last round. The light changed to the kind that makes cabins look like they are keeping secrets kindly. He walked to cabin 5, thinking he'd lower the thermostat to be consistent. From the path he saw light breathing behind the curtain's lamplight, he thought, and then knew there were no lamps on. Inside, the air greeted him with a soft settle. He put his hand near the nearest baseboard heater without touching, and felt the tidy warmth rolling up. The thermostat still reads 68 with its neat little smile. He put 2 fingers on the dial and very gently nudged it to 56. The heater sighed down. The house changed its mind then, without sound he could prove, and made a shape of air that asked for one more night of kindness. He turned it back and felt foolish. He wrote in his notebook, 5 keep 68 until morning. Someone had left a little note under the sink from years ago. Winter guests one night welcome. The letters had softened, but their calm hadn't. That night the lake spoke again. Cal slept and woke at 3:17, thinking of a screen door latch, the way it clicks when a hand tests it from the outside with gentle intention. He dressed and put his boots on without turning on the overhead, took a flashlight but didn't click it. The world had its own light. He walked up the lane in a quiet that let him hear his coat. The porch of cabin 5 looked as it always did. He put his hand on the knob and didn't turn it. He stood, and the house exhaled. 2 syllables in the air that sounded like a greeting you save for certain thresholds and for friends you haven't met yet. He stepped down and let the house keep its small secret. He stood on the path long enough to see the sky push up into a shade lighter, then went back to bed. In the morning he walked to cabin 5 and set the thermostat to 56 as he had planned. But as he left, he took off his hat in the doorway and said, "In the way a person thanks a room for keeping them dry. See you." He didn't say soon, but the word thought itself anyway. January drew a neat line. Snow made the cottages quieter, wrapped them in a book someone had closed with care. Days were a pattern of checks. Cabin 14's porch light stopped its flicker for good. Cabin 2's bathroom fan began to complain and then stopped. Cal found, inside the maintenance shed's door, a pencil where he hadn't left one. It had a brand stamped down its side that he knew from elementary school. He sharpened it with his knife and used it to put his dates in the notebook, a thin, soft graphite that pleased the paper. In late February, he stepped into cabin 12 and found the wax marker note he'd written on the prior visit. OK 2. 10 shifted slightly lower on the glass. It was impossible. He must have written it lower without remembering. He tried again and made the mark in a spot he could measure with his palm. 4 hand heights from the sill. A week later, it sat 3 fingers above that line. He laughed quietly at himself and the house, and decided the glass liked to pretend it was a chalkboard in a classroom he'd once known. March announced itself by drip and by crow. Cal began to open cabinets to let warm air in, began to untie porch chairs and face them the right way slowly, so the chairs would remember without a jolt. He turned thermostats up a single click as nights became less brittle. He found that cabin 5 had adjusted itself during his rounds from 56 to 58 to 60 on different days, and each time he left it, he discovered it would drift, very gradually, back to 68 by the time he returned in the evening. He began to think of the number not as resistance, but as preference, the same way people feel about a chair in a room. He let it have its way, as long as the pipes were no longer at risk, and no manager was counting kilowatts. The week before opening, crews returned with rakes and leaf blowers, with paint cans and lists. Blaine from maintenance asked him whether the door at cabin 11 still stuck. Cal planed it, and when it closed flush, the sound it made was the sound of a story ending in the exactly right syllable. He touched the door jamb with gratitude the way a carpenter friend had taught him to, not superstitious, but something like that. He found in the spring inventory box a set of numbers for cabin doors, little brass numerals that he would screw in where last year's had gone crooked. The bag had a 6 in it that no door needed. He turned it in his palm. He didn't pocket it. He set it on the workbench in the maintenance shed in a small dish where they kept screws that didn't fit anywhere, as if eventually they would. On opening day, June 8, which mattered to no one and to everyone in a way that days do, when they come around, families arrived with coolers and rolled-up towels, and the sense that the beginning of a season had agreed to be kind. Cal stood back and watched a boy cross cabin 5's threshold and stop in the doorway as if he'd heard someone speak and wanted to listen. The boy's parents set groceries on the counter, and laughed at the way the screen door closed with an old-fashioned patience. The thermostat read 68, but that could have been the day and could have been the house doing what it had wanted to do for months. Make everything ready, the air included. When evening fell and porch lights came on in a soft row, Cal walked the lane one more time and let the sound of people return to what it had always been there. A murmur, a fork against a plate, a low hum of more than one person telling more than one story at once. In Cabin 5's window, he saw the reflection of the lake, and in the reflection, not a figure, but a widening of space the way a mirror sometimes magnifies comfort. He tipped his cap, a habit more for himself than for anyone else, and left the cottages to do what they had waited all winter to do, which was to house. That night, after the workday's tiredness sat down beside him, the radio found a far station. The announcer read scores in a slow voice. The numbers coming like the ones in his notebook had all season. He wrote nothing down. He closed his eyes and saw 56 and 68 and 6, 8 and 3, 17 as coordinates. Not on a map, but in a season. And when the radiator clicked, it sounded less like metal and more like a door held open for a second longer than necessary, the friendly kind of courtesy house doors have when someone's arms are full, and the key still has to find the way it's cut. Story number 7. There was an estate archivist who didn't mind learning a house the way one learns a person by listening to what it keeps and what it lets go. Her name was Evie. Attorneys called her when a historical home needed its paper life put in order before a sale, when trunks full of letters and drawers of forgotten stationery had to be sorted into acid-free boxes and labels that would outlast a season. Evie liked empty houses for the same reason many people avoided them. They talked in a language of tiny sounds and steady preferences, a vocabulary of hinges and thermostat clicks. On a gray afternoon that decided not to rain, she walked up to a narrow brick townhouse on a block of similar facades. A small brass plate by the door listed the original owner's name, carefully re-engraved by someone who still liked the way letters look in metal. The attorney had left a key in an envelope with a note: utilities on low, alarm disarmed, please leave thermostat at a comfortable setting. Evie smiled at the words, comfortable setting. She found the key pleasingly heavy and turned it. The strike plate accepted the latch with the sound of a sentence finishing softly. Inside, the entry hall had checkerboard tiles that had learned to faintly shine just from being walked upon for a century. A long case clock stood against the wall, handsome, and stopped. Along the baseboard near the plaster medallion that knew how to hold a ceiling, a wire ran to a wooden box with 8 little windows and tiny labels: parlor, dining, kitchen, master, morning room, study, nursery, attic. It was a servant callboard, relic of a house that had once communicated with itself by bell and button. Evie had seen a few in older homes. This one wore dust like a light shawl, and for an instant, the little bulbs behind the squares ranked 6 and 8 glowed, as if waking from a nap so faint she might have imagined it. She blinked. The panel sat like a picture again, only remembering itself. The hall smelled of beeswax, and the soft cold of a building that had been kept at arm's length from winter. The thermostat at the foot of the stairs read 68. The needle purposeful without being bossy, she left it alone. In the front parlor, long windows caught a thin strip of afternoon. Evie set up on the dining table, a field of gentle scratches under the varnish, spreading out folders, cotton gloves, a pencil. She began with what she always began with: chronology, postmarks, corresponding handwriting, a line of years unfurled in pencil on a legal pad. The house itself seemed to draw closer when she opened the first box of letters. A page dated June 8 from some distant decade had a ring of pencil around the day, the kind one draws by pressing and then being surprised by their own hand. On the far wall, a framed set of buttons waited above a fireplace. They were the room-side cousins of the callboard in the hall, small ivory circles labeled in serif letters: drinks, coal, tea. Evie pressed one gently without meaning to. A metal sound answered from somewhere beneath the floor. No bell exactly, but the memory a house keeps of sounding one. She wrote in her notes, dining call hardware present. Faint response, still audible. On the next line, as if she were writing down weather, her pencil wandered and spelled home very small without her noticing until she stopped to get tea from her thermos and saw it. A word that had arranged itself the way letters sometimes sneak into margins. She underlined it lightly and let it be a coincidence, the kind that makes work feel companionable. She did a first pass. The kitchen smelled faintly of old recipe cards and fresh paint. A discreet back stair, narrow and careful, led to a landing where light stood, like a polite guest. In a maid's room under the eaves, she found a small trunk, empty but for a folded paper star with 8 points that someone had cut from the corner of a catalog and kept. She placed the star in a folder called Ephemera and wrote, "Star unknown hand." In a second-floor study, a desk that had gone with the airs but left its shape on the rug had been replaced by nothing, which made the room feel like an inhale held just a beat too long. The dumbwaiter door in the pantry wouldn't stay latched. She pushed it. It eased open again with the quiet self-regard of a habit. She closed it with a ribbon and a promise to herself to be patient with it. As afternoon thinned, the long case clock in the hall gave a sound so soft she wasn't sure it had made any at all, a single tick, reluctant and bright, like a coin against a table edge. It was precisely 3:17 by her watch. She would not say things about hours and houses because she liked facts, but the number pinned itself gently to the day. When she examined the clock, the hands sat where they had sat, since someone had let the weight descend without rewinding. She touched the glass and felt the particular cold of a face that hasn't been breathed on. In the dining room, one small drawer stuck the way drawers stick when they think they've done enough for decades. Evie kept a micro spatula in her kit for just such politeness. She eased the drawer open half an inch and then the rest, smiling when it agreed. Inside sat a ring of keys, their brass tags stamped with numbers made by a tool that liked to be exact. 56, read the smoothest tag, worn satin by a thumb, not hers. She lifted the ring, felt the cool weight of a previous life, and set it in a box labeled "Keep with Property." She liked returning things to their own stories, instead of borrowing them for new ones. The house managed its light without her. Lamps turned themselves to that low clarity that old lamps understand. In one of her photographs of the hall, the callboard reflected in a framed mirror at an angle that turned 8 little windows into a small constellation. In the mirror, they seemed closer together than on the wall itself, like a gathering instead of a list. When she looked directly at the glass, she saw her own shoulder and the faint, soft halo of the chandelier. For an instant, there was an extra point of light in that halo, not bright, not mischievous, just the way glass sometimes holds onto a reflection, a breath longer than a room expects. She took the back stairs, not to startle the air. Houses with back stairs liked people who walked like they belonged. The narrow treads remembered a certain weight. They answered her with that sound. At the bottom, the pantry held a rolling pin that refused to leave with anyone, and a note left inside a cupboard, some previous caretaker's pencil. "Winter guests, one night welcome." The handwriting had softened to a whisper. She wished, for reasons she couldn't articulate, that she had brought a loaf of bread to let rise on the counter as she worked. The feeling passed. The service call board in the hall gave a small tremor, an entirely material twitch, as if a connection had briefly found itself. The glass covering the labels fogged at one corner and cleared. The tiny bulb behind the square labeled "Parlor" decided to wake for a fraction of a second. Evie peered at the wiring without opening the box. The house had not been rewired through that board in half a century. It was a relic. She tried a logical ladder. Temperature change, draft, floor vibration. Then she stepped into the parlor, because the board had made a request without asking. The air there felt, simply, ready the way a set table feels ready even when the dishes aren't out yet. She worked until the light began to behave like evening. The neighborhood softened to footsteps and polite laughter through the chilly air. When she started to pack, the dumbwaiter nudged its door again like something remembering a habit. She went into the pantry and looked down the shaft, a small square of darkness, with an appropriate smell of flour long absorbed. She did not send anything up or down. She closed the door and tied it again loosely, as one ties a promise they mean to come back to. The second day began with better light, and a sense that the house had been awake for a while. On a high shelf in the study, Evie found a ledger marked "Household" in a hand that had been confident for decades. The pages listed deliveries and visitors with a steady regularity. Coal on Wednesdays, linens on Saturdays, portraits at half-light on Tuesdays, and a number repeated in the margin of one page in pencil, as if someone had done arithmetic while distracted. 3:17. It appeared next to an entry about a clock repairman. There was a note small as the head of a pin pays a visit with a good ear. Evie smiled into the paper and wrote, "Repairman visited. Time noted." The ledger felt pleased to be touched. Behind the call board's wooden back, reached by a few careful screws and a small apology to the varnish, she found an old folded card tucked in the wiring cavity. On it was a list of bell codes, 2 quick rings for tea, 1 long for carriage, and a child's additions in pencil, the kind of scribble a bored person makes when pretending a panel is a map. A faint 8-point star had been added next to the box that represented the nursery. She tucked the card back partly where she'd found it because some things prefer to stay partly discovered. Evie sorted photographs of the house in happier, cluttered years. One snapshot, unremarkable at first, showed the hall in black and white with the call board dark and the long case clock reading precisely 3:17 as someone with a felt hat came in from the stoop. Another photo from years later, when colors had softened to a gentle yellow, showed the same hall with the chandelier hung 1 link lower and, here she laughed aloud, 9 bulbs where there had been 8. She counted twice and saw it was simply the angle and a flare of the camera. Still, she counted once more because counting sometimes makes one feel properly present. In the afternoon, the attorney came by to check in, stepping inside with the reflex of quiet people have in old spaces. He signed where he needed to and told Evie about a buyer who loved the bones and wanted to be sensitive to the intangible things that make a house behave. "They're not superstitious," he said, "just respectful." He handed her a note the previous occupant's niece had written, "Please keep the call box." It made the house a better listener. Evie folded the note, which felt like someone else had written exactly what she would have. When the attorney left, Evie was alone again in the narrow grace of the townhouse. She took one last pass to see if the house wanted to tell her anything before she packed. In the front parlor, a rug she would have sworn had lain straight yesterday now sat canted a degree toward the window. She nudged it with her toe back to center, not out of correction but courtesy. She paused by the long case clock and touched the wood. Sometimes, not always, one leaves a thing unwound because its silence holds history. She listened for the awkward, endearing, impossible idea that it could tick again just once, but it remained contained and good. On her way out, she wrote a large, clear label on an archival box. Correspondence Household 6, 8 dinners, recipes, notes, and beneath it in smaller letters, Ring of Keys, 56. She placed the box among the others near the entry so that when movers came, they would see order and feel calm. The thermostat still read 68 when she glanced up, the number steady as a lighthouse. It was evening before she noticed, in her laptop's export of the day's photographs, that one image of the dining room doorway from the hall had picked up a faint band of light low to the floor, the way a ribbon of warmer air sometimes became visible when captured by a machine that wants to see what eyes don't. The band ran from the callboard toward the parlor as if, had there been a tray in a hand, someone would have carried it while the house politely held its breath. She did not share this photo with the attorney. She filed it in her own folder named Listening and let the house keep most of its silence. Weeks later, after the buyer had begun to carefully refresh paint and repair, Evie was invited back to place some of the papers in built-in shelves that had been restored. The callboard remained. It had been fitted with new bulbs that weren't wired to anything, a decorative kindness. 2 of those bulbs, at the 6 and the 8 positions, glowed slightly more warmly than the others, not bright, not disobedient, simply as if the wood behind them knew them more intimately. The long case clock had been cleaned, its case gently oiled, its works left mostly as they had been. Evie did not ask anyone to wound it. The niece of the previous occupant visited and stood in the hall with her hand on the banister, smiling with most of her face and some of her memory. "It feels the same," she said, "and better." Evie nodded as if someone had just spoken the right 2 syllables in a place that likes words that have been earned. When she went home, Evie took out the folded 8-point star she had kept as a token not of theft but of gratitude. She would return it, she told herself. When the exhibit case for the house's paper life was ready, she set the star on her desk near a cup of tea. The steam rose and made a brief pattern in the air that looked the way warmth looks when it slips down a back stair and settles itself exactly where it belongs. She let the star be an asterisk in her day, a notation that some places, when empty, still do the work of hosting so thoroughly that strangers feel like staff, and staff feel like guests. She slept well that night, which isn't always how after hours in old houses leave one, and dreamed nothing she could recall in the morning beyond the sense of a door closing gently, after waiting exactly the right amount of time for someone to come through. Story number 8. There was a municipal inspector who carried a thermal camera the way a doctor carries a stethoscope. Her name was Nia. She worked for a small city that had grown quickly, and then, for a few years, taken a breath. Banks held more homes than they wanted to. Her job was to assess the ones about to be brought back to life, check for insulation failures, water intrusion, places where pipes had whispered to wood too long. She liked doing it at dusk, when the day gave the houses a little warmth to loosen their stories. And the thermal palette on her screen bloomed in oranges and blues, in a way that made sense to her eyes. One late autumn evening, Nia parked in front of a low-slung ranch on a quiet curve. The mailbox leaned like a tired shoulder. A notice from the city's registry for vacant buildings had been taped to the front window and had loosened along one edge. The power had been turned back on for her inspection. The gas was off. She signed the sheet on her clipboard, keyed the lockbox, and turned the thumb turn. The deadbolt came back with the decisive yes old locks make when grateful. Inside, the air had the complicated empty smell of drywall dust and a kitchen that had been cleaned in a hurry weeks ago. Baseboards were neat, paint was decent. Carpets had been pulled, revealing a tan floor. The thermostat in the hall woke when it sensed her and offered 68 without asking anything of her at all. She left it. She always did. She did her normal loop. Make the floors safe, prop doors with wedges that look like small boats, set the ladder under the attic hatch, and leave it folded for later. In the living room, she set her thermal camera to an iron bow palette and panned slow. Studs in the exterior wall showed themselves as cooler verticals like bars in a calm song. Outlets made small, warm squares where wires slept. Near the window, an irregular patch glowed warmer than it should. Not heat exactly, more like air that had recently moved with intention. She waved her hand through the spot and watched her own heat signature bloom and vanish. She marked the wall, likely drafted seal. Her moisture meter was one of her favorite little machines, steady, honest, not dramatic. In the kitchen, beneath the sink, the meter read 6.8% in the wood of the base, content, nothing to report. She wrote 6.8 good beneath a note about missing escutcheons. The water heater in the hall closet, disconnected, sat quiet with its face turned away. The pressure gauge on a nearby line, still pressurized from a test someone had done, pointed at 56. She wrote the number down because she wrote all numbers down, and because numbers made sense even when human stories didn't. She glanced at her watch out of habit when entering new rooms, something she did to make time part of the notes, not because time was asking to be noticed. In the smallest bedroom, her watch said 3:17, which was a trick of forgetfulness and setting. She hadn't adjusted it since the last month's daylight change. She adjusted it then and said to the empty room aloud, "There." The room took the syllable and filed it without comment. The house's mirrors were gone. The previous owners had taken them. There was one piece of glass left, a sliding door to a shallow backyard where the grass had kept growing politely for a while and then decided to rest. She scanned the glass. It appeared as blackness on the thermal display glass was like that, but her screen showed a faint smear near knee height, a warm streak the shape of a touch sliding toward the latch. She stepped closer and held her own knee near the glass to see whether she was chasing her own comet tail. The streak on the screen had already begun to fade as heat does when it remembers itself. She made a note about tightening the seal. Above the hallway, she pulled the attic hatch and waited for the house to let her. Attics have their own weather. This one breathed out a little dust and a careful, dry scent. She clicked her headlamp lower. She liked to be kind to old rafters with her light and pushed the ladder up. She tested each rung. At the top, she put her head through and let her eyes adjust. The thermal camera showed insulation like a field, warm and then cooler, where a contractor had missed a strip years ago that had never minded being missed until now. She took a photo. A line of small, regular shapes appeared along one joist, cooler than the surrounding air. Not footprints exactly, but the pattern kneecaps would make if a person had crawled there once and not again. It was old, a ghost in code. She marked it to be filled and moved to the next bay. She liked how attics remind one of the house's hidden handwriting, the notches cut into a beam by a builder's hand, the pencil numbers mapping distance from the end, 4, 8, 12, and somewhere a rubbed-away 16 decorated with a small star because a carpenter was human and bored for a second. Nia saw such a star in this attic on a rafter by the hatch. 8-pointed and quick. She smiled and dropped her pencil. It landed, not on the sheetrock as she expected, but with a gentle click against something metal. She pushed the insulation back a little and found the corner of a tin. Inside were a few curled photograph edges, all empty of faces, walls, and the shape of a chair and a door closing. She put the tin back where it had been, covering it, and wrote in her mind, "Don't add your own stories to places that already have enough." Downstairs again, she walked the hallway slowly the way she always did, to let her senses get ahead of the devices. That was when her camera showed the thing she would think about for months, because it wasn't a thing really, but a collection of heat changes that together made a shape that could be mistaken for a path. Starting at the front door and moving toward the back, a series of faint, warmer ovals appeared one after the other, at about the distance a person's steps will choose if given a hall to walk at an unhurried pace. Not bright, not obvious, she could have missed them if she wasn't already looking for drafts. They faded quickly. She took one still for the file, and told herself to note this as a likely afterimage of her own movement earlier, even though the spacing didn't match her stride. Her radio chirped in her pocket, the soft tone the office used to check in. She answered. "Everything ordinary so far," she said. That was the truth. She had no appetite for the version of stories that make for headlines. She liked houses that were afraid to stand out. "Copy," the voice said, and then, because the night did what night does, the radio's time display ticked to a new minute with a tiny digital insistence. In the bathroom at the end of the hall, the mirror had been taken, but the outline of it remained, a paler rectangle on the wall. Pipes ticked in the wall behind the tub for no reason other than wanting attention. Nia ran the thermal camera along the baseboard. The corner behind the vanity held a cooler patch the shape of a small shelf. She pushed the cabinet with her hip. Something behind it scratched, not alive. Just wood, adjusting to being noticed. "Okay," she murmured, which was no different than saying nothing, and wrote, "Vanity shim." She liked to finish with the kitchen, because kitchens are where the most changes tend to be obvious. The sink trap had been replaced well. Behind the stove's gap, the wall was cleaner than most. In her screen, the floor showed a long, cooler stripe from the back door to the center of the room, the mark of air that continued to move through, or the habit of movement. She imagined for a second the way a person might drift to that spot with groceries and, balancing, turn to reach for a light with their elbow. She shook the image away because imagination is useful, and also not. She packed her ladder and took one more pass with the thermal camera, this time slower, lower, letting it look over the living room's floor. The screen bloomed as her perspective changed. For a heartbeat she saw, as clearly as thermal pictures ever show anything clearly, a pair of warm ovals on the floor near the entry table's ghost, the size and distance of someone having stood there to read mail. No other prints around them. She felt, in her feet, absurdly, the memory of taking off her shoes. Habit, she told herself. The room made its small evening sounds return vent, far car, light from a neighbor's motion sensor ticking off. She was alone. She knew she was alone. On the way out, she checked the thermostat one more time for the log. It still read 68. When she brought her hand near it but not touching, the thermal camera showed the difference, her heat like a field moving toward a steady island. She took the photo because she liked the way it looked, not because anyone needed it for the report. Back in her office, she loaded the images. Most looked like 95% of her files. Places to seal, places to dry, places to insulate. The living room sequence with the ovals near the door made her pause, if only because the spacing of them suggested someone shorter than she was had stood there. She resized the frame and saw that she had captured the faint shadow of the front window's mullions across the floor lines that would have been invisible to eyes at that hour. She flagged the photo for her own folder because it was beautiful, not because it was evidence. 3 weeks later, the house went to a small contractor who liked to be patient. He and his crew pulled new wire, replaced outlets, laid underlayment. Nia came back for a second pass before final. The contractor had installed a mirror in the hall where the old one had been, the kind with a beveled edge that makes a face seem kinder. She scanned the mirror because sometimes a mirror will show you an air leak if it is set against an outside wall. Mirrors, though, are liars to thermal cameras. They swallow and return. On her screen, the mirror was blank. In the corner of the frame, though, glowed a small dot of warmth reflected from somewhere out of sight, a thermostat, a hand, and for an instant, a faint duplicate of that dot flickered beside it, like an extra point of light near a ceiling fixture, like a twin remembering to follow. She lowered the camera, and there was only Nia, her clipboard, and the narrow hall that had been empty for months. The contractor called her that night, laughing at his own nerves. "Hey," he said, "we were putting in the baseboard in the living room and found a little tin in the wall. Old photos, no people in them, corners of rooms, windows, a door closing. One of them has the long hall, with what looks like footprints leading to the back. They're just shadows, but it's something. You know anyone who wants them?" She gave him Evie's number at the Historical Society without connecting any threads out loud. The contractor thanked her and told her the thermostat had settled nicely at 68 since they'd gotten the furnace to behave, which was a good number for an empty house that needed to be shown. She said, "Sounds right," and meant the words as a simple assessment, not as a benediction. On her final visit, the ranch had blinds up and a new porch light. She walked through with the camera for habit's sake. The studs were the right color. The corners stayed where they should be on the thermal screen. She closed her report in a neat paragraph and, without writing it down, added the smallest of addendums in her head. Some places keep warmth the way they keep sound, in a pattern of absence and presence that only appears when you look with tools built to be patient. As she stepped out, she looked back once, because people look back, at least once, the way you glance at a seat you've just left, even if you know nothing fell. The living room was pale with winter daylight. The front door's bevel made a narrow oval like a pocket mirror. The latch closed with a generous patience. On her route to the next house, Nia turned the radio low enough for the tires to be the song. At a red light, she realized she had written the numbers 56 and 6.8 several times in the day, and at exactly 3:17 her phone buzzed with a message that turned out to be a wrong number, that still said, in 2 brief syllables, that someone had arrived home. She smiled, and let the light change things in front of her and behind her. The houses would be ready by spring. People would move into them with rugs that didn't quite fit yet. They would set thermostats, and not know they were keeping a promise someone else, someplace else had made before them. If she thought, now and then, of the thermal ovals near the entry table's ghost, she didn't think of ghosts. She thought of habit, of greeting, of how spaces learn our paths and then practice them in the quiet of late afternoons to be polite when we come back. She kept the photo in a folder no one needed, and in years when her work took her to homes of other ages and other manners, she watched the way warmth sits in rooms that have waited, and she learned to hear, under duct clicks and distant street, the gentle 2-syllable kindness of houses that have, in their own way, been saying the same thing all along. Story number 9. There was a home automation integrator who liked being the first person a house learned to listen to. His name was Rafi. Builders called him when the drywall had cured and the paint had quieted, when recessed speakers waited behind their paintable grills, when the thermostats woke to a room with only their own numbers to keep them company. He moved through empty rooms with an iPad and a canvas bag of little parts that looked more like jewelry than like the heart of a system. He liked getting the timing right doorbell chime, entry lights at a fraction, a soft voice greeting no one until someone arrived. One winter evening, he drove up to a hillside house the color of a cloud, new and careful and not yet lived in. The developer had asked for a full setup. Lighting scenes for showings, climate scheduling, door and window sensors tied to a quiet notification, and a little moment at the front door, a recorded 2-syllable welcome to make people feel returned rather than arrived. The note on the lockbox said in its own tidy friendliness, "Please leave temperature comfortable." Inside, the entry floor shone and didn't mind it. The foyer chandelier was modern, a clean circle of 8 small bulbs under frosted shades. They glowed when the switch decided to help him see. The thermostat on the wall stirred as he passed and settled at 68, a number like a city at night when the traffic has thinned. Rafi smiled at it. He touched the screen just to hear the soft beep that meant it had recognized him, then left it alone. He plugged a tiny access point into an outlet in the pantry, watched the power light blink up, and connected to the skeleton of the network that the builder's electrician had left humming. He loved this part, watching the names of quiet devices climb into his apps list as if arriving past a velvet rope. Dining dimmer, foyer, ring, whole house audio, east blinds. He gave the front door lock a tap on the back plate and felt it twitch like a patient animal deciding to accept a leash. In his scenes tab, he created arrive, away, good night, and showtime. He slid their sliders with the care of a bartender, making the exact drink a room needed. The developer had added a small request. Could the foyer speaker say, "Welcome home," softly when the front door opened during showings? Not the chirpy robot kind, something human and young, but not specific to any person. Rafi had a library of recordings created for just such circumstances. He picked a warm voice, set the volume low, and tied it to the door sensor with a tiny rule. Speak phrase when door opens if it's between 9 a.m. and 7 p.m. He tested it by pulling the door toward him an inch and easing it shut. The voice met him 2 syllables shaped like a smile and ended as fast as a bow. When he walked deeper into the house, the foyer speaker spoke again, very softly, as if repeating the phrase for itself. He checked the app. No trigger. No log. He told himself he'd jostled the door sensor or created a doubled rule. He deleted, rewrote, and moved on. Down the hall, the family room's built-in played a test tone that behaved, politely glassy, bouncing in a room that wanted rugs. He set the dining dimmer to 56% for the showing scene because that level made the wood table glow without throwing shadows under plates. When he looked back at the slider a minute later, it sat at 58. He moved it again, and it returned calmly, not stubbornly, to 56. He decided the dimmer had a mind for rounder numbers than he did, and let it win. He ran his hand along the top of the stair rail, checking for the small grind that sometimes meant a speaker wire had found a way to vibrate against wood. Nothing. Upstairs, the primary bedroom had a thermostat of its own. He set a schedule for the system 62 at night, a little warmer in the morning should anyone hold a showing then, and watch the graph make a shape like careful hills. As he closed the screen, the schedule rearranged itself. 68 became the anchor, a line that the rest of the schedule slipped toward like iron filings leaned toward a magnet. He frowned at the app and thought of all the times he'd seen this, the way some clients had routines they didn't admit until after the first cold snap. He locked the schedule into place. The anchor reappeared anyway. He made a note to revisit. The front doorbell, a handsome black circle with a camera like an iris, gave a single chime, a half note, really. He checked the app. No press recorded. He walked to the door and looked through the sidelight. The porch was empty except for a lone delivery flyer stuck under the mat. He brought it inside and set it upright against the entry table's ghost, the rectangle of light on the wall where a table would be. The flyer slid slowly until it rested at the exact center of that rectangle. He imagined gravity as a stylist. He opened his bag to focus on the work. He spoke into his phone to record a note. Doorbell latency test. Single chime without button. Check voltage. His own voice in the big room sounded like a person in a church pretending not to be heard. In the next room, the kitchen, a motion sensor logged him in its bland little way. Motion. 3:17 p.m. He glanced at his watch. It said 3:17, like it was proud to be right for once. He exhaled and told himself to finish the upstairs before the light left. In the nursery, empty, soft blue because the painter had chosen calming names from the fan deck, his app showed a device in the room that didn't exist. Nursery lamp, it called itself. Lighting. Level controllable. He pinged it. The ping pinged back. He opened the closet. The shelf and rod were blank. He crouched to see an outlet he hadn't noticed and found nothing plugged in. He banished the ghost lamp from the list and watched it return of its own accord, numbered slightly differently, nursery lamp 2, with a neat power state of 56%. He flagged the device to investigate and wrote in his corner of the mind notebook what he always wrote when something insisted on being present without introducing itself. Let it be for now. The logs wrote their own story. Front door, open 9:12, 9:14, 10:32. A test of the garage, contact at 11:06. A motion at 3:17 in the hall. A smaller motion at knee height a second later. He turned the arrive scene off and on, watching the foyer light slip from 0 to 30 to 56 to 68 in the space of his thumb sliding. He took a small, efficient pleasure in seeing how a room composed itself. The foyer speaker spoke the 2 syllables again when he was 10 feet away. Not enough to be spooky, just enough to make him aware he was being rehearsed. He sat cross-legged in the primary room with his back to the wall, pulling lamp loads into groups named for comfort. Reading, entry, dinner. In the mirrored door of the closet, he saw the chandelier reflected from the hall, a clean ring of 8 bulbs. And then, for a fraction of a second as he reached to name a scene, a 9th light winked in the mirror near the top of the frame, an artifact of glass that didn't mind making extra. He raised his hand to match the angle and saw only himself, the leveled lights of the hallway, nothing more. At dusk, the blinds brought themselves down at his instruction with a sound like paper learning how to be more private. The iron bow pallet of his test thermal camera, he liked to carry one for draft chasing when builders swore no air moved, showed cool at the window, warm at the baseboard, and a faint soft smear low near the foyer. The leftover of a hand near the door, he told himself, was his own. The thermostat in the hall, in the corner of the thermal screen, glowed like a little sundae. He made his changes and found, after a long breath, that the line on its display had eased itself back to 68. Rafi finished with a last test. He set showtime, watched each room take its light the way a stage takes cues, and opened the front door to hear the welcome trigger exactly as planned. He waited in the silence that followed for the house to repeat itself. After a long beat, somewhere in the ceiling grid, the same voice spoke again, half a second late, as though a second version of the system had been practicing in another room and decided to keep up out of politeness. He checked zones. Only one was assigned to that phrase. He told himself the audio packet had been looped by a delay he hadn't yet adjusted. He shut everything down the way one leaves a sleeping infant room softly. At the base of the stairs he paused, because he had the feeling he might be late to a ceremony. He wasn't. He was on time for a small thing the house did. The foyer light rose by itself to 30%, and the thermostat's display brightened for a moment, then went calm again. He reached to lower the light and stopped, his hand close to the dimmer, the way a person stops a hand because something is asked for a moment. He left the light where it had put itself and locked the door behind him with his thumb. 3 days later, after the brokers open, the developer called, amused. "This is going to sound like marketing," she said. But 3 people mentioned how the house felt like it turned itself on to greet them. One said the entry light came up just as they stepped in, and the temperature felt exactly right. Rafi told her about the scenes he'd programmed and made a small joke about the house liking 68, which the developer laughed at as if numbers had preferences like paint colors. "Whatever you're doing," she said, "keep doing it." A week after the buyers moved in, one of them emailed him, curious and not complaining. The note said, "We set the upstairs to 66 to sleep, but most nights it drifts to 68 around 3. It's not uncomfortable, actually a little comforting. Is there a timer we missed?" Also, the 2 little words in the entry feel nice. Is that odd? Rafi checked the schedule and found no timer. The log showed a routine labeled "Good night" had been triggered at 10:32, and again a small unnamed event at 3:17 flagged the hallway motion and the foyer voice at a lower volume than it had been set to. He could have pulled the fuse on the voice, forced the number to stay where numbers stay when no one else disagrees, but he didn't. He left the 2-syllable greeting as it was, the light rising the way it had chosen to, the number parked in the center like a porch chair. He returned once to add a sensor in the nursery because the owners had decided to make it an office. The phantom nursery lamp no longer appeared in his list. In the app's history, the line where it had once sat remained, a gap in the table like an extra seat left out of habit. He scrolled past it and, at the bottom of the log, saved a scene with a name he didn't often use in a professional file, House Knows. It set the foyer light to 30, left the thermostat free to find 68 between 3 and 4 a.m., and whispered the 2 syllables at the door, only when it was sure no one would be startled. When he left for the last time, he stood in the entry with the house behind him like the hush that follows applause. The chandelier reflected in the glass with 8 small suns, and for a blink, a 9th point of light grazed the edge of the circle, and then went on its way. He put his iPad in his bag. The doorbell gave a single polite note, as if pressing a button for a promise rather than a person. He went home thinking about how some places prefer certain numbers and certain phrases, and that it would always be part of his work to let a house keep a few of its own settings without arguing. Story number 10. There was an estate sale organizer who treated other people's rooms as carefully as envelopes that had already been opened once. Her name was Jules. Families called her when a house was too full of its own past to pack into boxes without help. She and her small crew went through drawers and cupboards, tagged, priced, and arranged, made walking paths where the house wanted to show itself, and tried to keep the feeling of home even when everything inside would soon be somewhere else. On a bright morning that was also somehow sleepy, Jules parked in front of a 1920s Dutch colonial with a porch like a shrug. The lawyer had left a key in a simple envelope and written on the flap, "Bring it to life kindly." The family had cleared clothing and keepsakes. What remained were the things people forget. They lean on lamps, irons, a small collection of blue plates, a cardboard box of curtain rings, a doorstop shaped like a sleeping dog. Jules liked a house at this stage. It had a heartbeat lower than usual. It was empty of people and full of manners. She stepped inside and let the entry light do what lights do when they meet a person. The thermostat on the wall read 68 without boasting. She left it. The dining room had a chandelier with 8 small shades and 1 bare socket, where a shade had gone wandering years ago. In mirrors along the sideboard, the chandelier reflected a ring of light that looked 1 shade fuller than the real one, as if the mirror wanted to fix something, fast, before someone noticed. Jules smiled at the fussiness of reflection and set down her clipboard. Her process was a gentle equation. She walked through and let the rooms point to what they wanted to be in this new brief chapter. The front parlor's low table wanted books. The rug wanted to be straight. The side chair wanted an Afghan even if it had never had one before. She wrote tags in neat ink, 12, 32, best offer, and affixed them with painter's tape. She marked paths with arrows on blue tape to guide future feet. She liked to make figure-8 circuits through rooms so people could move without stopping each other. The loop looked good on paper. In the house, the arrows she stuck at knee height wanted to lift and slide toward other angles, as if the plaster exhaled on cue. She repositioned them, then laughed at herself when one arrow dropped from the wall and landed with the point aimed toward a short hall. "All right," she said softly, not surrendering, just agreeing to try it the house's way. In the kitchen, a small drawer had a pencil with a hardware store's name and a nub that made the lead feel smooth. She labeled a bundle of wooden spoons with it. The pencil made 5 look kindly. In the basement, she found a crate of mason jars where the labels had loosened themselves into curls. She wrote a sign for the whole crate, 56, because sometimes a number looks like the shape of a collection. She stuck the sign in with a clothespin and tapped it once like it was a shoulder. On the crate's slat, faint and years older than the tape, someone had written the same number in pencil and circled it, the kind of coincidence that made an organizer feel like she was being introduced to a house's old arithmetic. A grandfather clock stood in the hallway, handsome and unwound. Jules did not touch it. She stood near it to set a price on a small table, and at exactly the time her phone said 3:17, the clock let go. A sound of metal very slowly, remembering it had once been asked what hour it was. Not a tick, not a chime. Something between those that behaved like a story told without words. She put down the tag on the table and wrote, for herself, in the bottom corner, "Leave this one for the family. Some things prefer not to march." She found an 8-point star doily folded neatly in the linen closet, its thread yellowed by kindness. It wanted to be seen. She laid it over the back of the side chair. In the mirror of a standing wardrobe in the upstairs hall, she saw herself at a small tilt, and beside her shoulder, a low band of sunlight moved along the floor to the landing, as if a person had lifted blinds at the exact speed memory likes to have. Her label maker sometimes spat out an extra label when its feed was jostled. She kept it in a flap pocket and tried to handle it like a live thing. As she printed kitchen utensils, the little machine whirred and then, not enough to make a story, pushed out another tiny strip that said, simply, "Home." She could have printed that accidentally by rolling the wheel out of habit. She understood muscle memory as much as any professional. She stuck the extra label to the inside of her clipboard, half as a joke to herself, half as a reminder. At the back door, the doorbell gave a single note that sounded like someone testing a choir they hadn't joined. She opened the door to the small yard and breezeway and stepped outside. The neighbor's wind chime made a short, orderly sentence, then went quiet. Across the fence, a washed piece of a number 8 was chalked on the concrete from a long-ago hopscotch. She went back in. The kitchen smelled like a place that had once known toast. And now, new Sunday. Her crew arrived and took instructions in whispers because houses sometimes prefer a library voice while they are becoming something else. Margot went to price books. Leo checked the attic for anything heavy the family might have missed. The attic door had a key in it, old brass with a stamped number 56 that matched nothing else in the house and everything. Jules turned it. The door swung, and coolness folded out. They found nothing but a trunk with quilts that had stripes like easy roads. She tagged the quilts one by one, handwriting soft where the needlework had been. She left the key in the attic door because sometimes keys look wrong in coat pockets. She made coffee on a small electric plate on the kitchen counter. There were still mugs left. When she poured, she noticed the thermostat in the hall had decided to show 68 in a way that made the number seem larger than a number. It was fine. She liked evenness. She said to the house in the same voice she used with crew and clocks, "We'll keep it as you like." On the morning of the sale, she arrived early to turn on lamps and lift shades. The dining chandelier, its one bare socket still bare, threw 8 small bowls of light, and in the window glass it hung one more shade than it wore. She checked the path arrows. They had rearranged themselves in the night to form a gentle loop through the parlor to the hall and back. People like circles. She let it stand. They opened the door at 9. The bell gave its single half-chime as if to practice. Footsteps filled the house with a sound like rain that doesn't want to get you wet. People moved quietly, as they often do in rooms that contain other people's afternoons. A woman in a wool coat stopped in the hall to press her hand to the banister and smiled in a way that didn't need to be explained. A boy carrying a toy car set it down on the doily and moved it in the perfect figure 8 that felt inevitable. His father reached for him and then didn't, because everything stayed gentle. "I feel like this house is showing us where to go," someone said near the kitchen. And Jules heard in that a compliment for the arrows, and maybe for the plaster that had breathed towards them. At 10, the grandfather clock made a sound like a throat clearing before a speech, and 3 hands paused near the same number. Jules looked at her phone. It was 10:0, not 3:17, which was an ordinary time for tea if one were strict about letters and customs. She adjusted the price on a stack of plates, not because the sound asked her to, but because the house had reminded her to be on time for nothing in particular and everything that matters. By noon, the house had less in it and more of itself. People took their plates and spoons and doorstops and left their own breath behind. Little tiny bits of life that made the rooms learn again. The thermostat stayed at 68 as if it had been hired. In the foyer, the welcome mat, there had not been one. She had put a borrowed piece of sisal down for the sake of feet. Read nothing because it had no letters. Still, a woman stepped across it and murmured the 2 syllables people murmur in houses like this. And Jules felt a relief that had no pressure behind it. Near closing, when the crowd thinned, a man approached her with a small tin he had found at the back of a drawer. Inside were photographs of corners, a window sash, a door closing, a reflection of a chandelier that had one light more than it should. "I don't know what to do with these," he said. "I feel like they belong to the house." Jules smiled and put them in an envelope marked "Keep with property," and slid the envelope into a kitchen drawer she had decided would be home base, for things that needed to be found by the family later. She wrote on the envelope in careful pencil, "Leave." When the last buyer left with a mirror held like a moon, Jules and her crew walked the rooms one more time. They collected tags that had fallen. They straightened what would go with the house and not with any person. In the hallway, the clock wore its hour quietly. The arrows on the walls had been peeled away by hands who had followed them, and then removed them as if tidying up after themselves. The attic key still sat in the door. Jules turned it and left the door propped open with a quilted trunk lid, so air could remind wood how to behave come evening. She took a felt pen and made a sign for the entry table's ghost. "Thank you." She leaned it, where the real table would have been. It stayed upright and then, as she stood there, slid very slowly until it aligned with the center of the rectangle of light on the wall, as if a level line had pulled it. She left it like that. As she locked the door, the bell gave its single note, and she wasn't sure if it was because she had moved the latch or because the house wanted to say something. She stood on the porch for a moment longer than she needed to, because the air at that hour always made her feel as if someone might be about to arrive. In the front window, the chandelier shone with 8 small bowls of light, and for a breath, in the reflection, a 9th point appeared, and then very civilly did not stay. She took the envelope of the key from her pocket and wrote, in neat handwriting across the flap, a note to the lawyer to pass to the family. "Your house likes to be kind to people. It prefers 68. The clock keeps its own idea of the right moments. There are photographs in a drawer that look like a room thinking. We left the path the way the house suggested. Please return the favor and leave a light on in the entry for a week or two. Houses notice. At home that night, Jules sorted receipts and counted out change in the steady rhythm of endings. In her pocket, she found the tiny label that had printed itself earlier. She stuck it on the inside of her notebook, next to a small drawing she'd made of the layout for the sale, the loop shaped like a figure 8, and thought about how often the work of letting a place be itself was simply the work of moving small arrows where they wanted to go. She slept well. In her dream, she walked through a house that had been emptied and then filled and then emptied again. And every time she passed the threshold, a voice that belonged to no person and to all places said 2 syllables that felt like a blanket set down well and a light left on at the right brightness. As the last door rests against its frame, listen to the way quiet returns. 10 empty houses have unspooled their careful habits, lights lifting to a kind brightness, thermostats settling on the same calm number, a single half chime at a threshold where no hand waits, mirrors making a circle of light seem just one glow more complete. Here and there, a figure traced like an 8, a penciled 6, 8 on a board, a time that nudges the hour, the way a hinge nudges a door 3, 17 small coordinates that appear like friendly landmarks on a night map. Empty does not mean alone. When rooms have been well used, they learn to host even when no one's coat hangs by the door. They rehearse kindness. A hallway practices footsteps so yours won't feel first. A vent breathes in pairs so a greeting won't startle. A number returns because steadiness makes good company. These houses asked for very little, only a light left low, a dial set to what it likes, a moment at the threshold to whisper 2 gentle syllables that belong to every address. If, later tonight, your own place settles and speaks if a pipe ticks, if a door sighs back into its latch, if the radiator gives a soft, punctual click, it's only the building remembering you. If a clock's single gear thinks of moving and doesn't, if a reflection seems fuller for a breath, it's only glass and habit keeping watch while you sleep. Try a small ritual for the hours ahead. Breathe into 6, breathe out to 8, and let the figure your breath draws be enough. Let your blankets take on the weight of a quiet key ring, each small story put away, each room gently closed. Somewhere, a porch light is left at a considerate fraction. Somewhere, a call board that no longer calls glows faintly in the mind. 2 little windows a touch warmer than the rest. The night is yours now, your rooms, your steady air, your certain bed. May your house hold to the number that feels right. May its welcome stay soft and easy, and may its corners keep only the kind of secrets that help you rest. When morning comes, the doors will open as they always have, and the light will be exactly where you left it. If this kept you company, tap like, subscribe for more quiet night tales, and tell us in the comments which small thread you noticed: a number, a light, a sound. Share this with someone who loves calm chills, and turn on the bell so the next story finds you at the right hour. Sleep well. Good night.